Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session, Learning and the Mind. I'm really pleased to introduce our speaker this morning. She is the author of the book, Design for How People Learn, and a learning strategy consultant with experience creating interactive e-learning experiences for clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to technology startups and grant-funded research initiatives. She loves brains and games and evidence-based practice. Her master's degree is in instructional systems technology from the Indiana University, and she's been an adjunct faculty member of the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and an e-learning guildmaster for many years. She's happiest whenever she gets to learn something new, and I think we're going to learn a lot from her this morning. So I'm going to welcome her to the stage, and if you welcome her with me, Julie Dirksen. Thank you.
Good morning. How's the volume sounds good. It sounds I sound resonant from here, so I'm assuming it's working. Sorry, I have this nifty speaker clock, and then the iPad goes off, and then I have to start all over again. There we go. Anyway, good morning. I feel like we got a nice kind of kickoff with the Matthew side. I'm super interested right now in is there anything that we can learn from sports coaching that we could bring into our own practice? Because we understand a lot about so I'm interested in his table tennis background, basically, is what I'm saying. I'm interested in this question of what kinds of modalities could we learn from that and bring into our practice when we're teaching something like management or leadership or something along those lines. I feel like there's something there. But that is not the topic that we're going to talk about right now. Instead, we are going to talk about motivation and learning. I know it said learning in the mind. I'm not 100% sure where that came from, but Don just said, well, I just did that. Okay. So motivation happens in the mind, so I think we're covered. I think it's fine. But this is a really interesting topic to me because I feel like I'm hearing a lot of these things when I go out and I talk to stakeholders or clients. We can't get learners to pay attention. Feel like that one? Yep. Does that resonate? Okay, great. How about we want our learners to be self-directed? Self-directed learners, yep. Okay, fabulous. My favorite one is they're just lazy. Anybody heard that one? Right? Which I always think is fascinating because I don't know any lazy people. Everybody I know is so busy they can barely see straight. And I'm like, how did you hire all the lazy people? Because I think that might be where the problem is coming from if you really do have an entire audience of lazy people. Because like I said, I don't know any of these lazy people. And the truth is, it's probably a little bit more complicated than that. So I have a quick audience survey for you. How many, during the course of the pandemic, said, oh, this would be a great time to learn something new, and signed up for a webinar or an online conference or something? How many people did that? Okay, most people, right? How many of you didn't actually make it to the event and said, oh, I'd watch the video later? Okay. How many of you actually watched all of the videos later? Okay, like 3, right? So it's not because you weren't self-directed learners. It's not because you weren't interested in learning something new. What was it? What was the real reason why those things didn't maybe make it all the way to completion? Time, right? Yeah. Sorry, what was that? Day job, right. Competing priorities. So when we start to say all of these things, the sort of 500-pound gorilla in the room is competing priorities. Everybody has 17 different things that they could be doing with every minute, hour, day that they have to pick. They have to say, what is my highest priority right now? And the answer is, it is frequently not our training. Maybe they just have more important things to do, right? The other question I have is, have you talked to them about it? How many people in the room get regular time being able to kind of talk to and interact with the people that you're designing learning for? How many people? Okay, that's not enough, right? I'm not going to talk about things like, user interviewing or user research and stuff like that today, but I guarantee you that if you only did one thing different from this conference, which is to find users to actually talk to about the stuff that you're designing for them, that alone would be well worth the kind of cost of admission at that point. And this is a thing that happens over and over and over again. I fight for it on every project I work on, to have some time where I'm actually interacting with the users, and I don't always get it. So even if I'm kind of, trying to use the big lever and insist on it, it doesn't always happen. So one of the big things that we know from all of this is if they have a problem that your material solves for them, then there's a good chance you're going to fit into that slot. Instead of being number 16 out of 17, you're going to be up in 1 or 2, right? But if you don't know what problems they're trying to solve or what they care about or what they're motivated by, then you're probably not framing it in a way that's going to sound compelling to them. So I've just given the whole talk, and now everybody can go off to a different, no. But that is actually the crux of what we're talking about. I mean, that is fundamentally the bottom line. And your subject matter experts and your stakeholders think that they know what the people in the audience care about and think that they can tell you that. And they're not always wrong, but just a fairly high percentage of the time. So being able to have some kind of communication and contact with the people who are in your audience. I'm currently working on a project for the state of Mississippi, Mississippi State University actually, on nutrition and health information for pregnant and new mothers who use WIC SNAP benefits, which is the pregnant and new mothers who are using, who are accessing WIC SNAP benefits, which is the public service. So, food benefit or, things like that. And we spend a lot of time in these meetings saying, well, I think they're interested in this, or I think that they care about this, or I think that they're doing, looking here. And I'm like, so my latest thing with them is, there are people who actually know what this audience is interested in. It's the audience. So we really do need to be talking to these people more. And in fact, there's a whole area of like co-design where you involve people. I just heard a thing, and I'm a little bit ashamed that I didn't know about it before, but within the accessibility for different communities, hearing impaired or whatever, there's an ethos of nothing for us without us. And I think that that's a really nice idea. If you are designing for an audience, but designing without them, you're probably getting something wrong about it. So soapbox over, let's talk about some of the specifics of motivation. When I first started getting interested in this, 20 odd years ago, this was kind of it. Like you had this and you had maybe Keller's ARCS model and stuff like that. We have our Maslow's hierarchy. There's a bunch of problems with this. There's some interesting ideas in it, but there's a bunch of problems. Now, during the pandemic, it looked a little bit more like this. And on any given day, it's probably this, right? But there's more models that we can look at. What kinds of motivation issues are you having in your audiences? I want to know. What are the struggles? Where are the places where you're having issues? We have a person with a microphone, otherwise you can just talk loud. So.
For a lot of our learners, they don't know what they need. So pointing them in the right direction, they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, absolutely. They don't know what they don't know. Catherine Lombardozzi did a nice research report for the e-learning guild, or the Learning Guild now, a while back on self-directed learning, and she was talking about, do people have the right skill set to be self-directed learners? Do they know where to find things? Do they know what they're missing? And if they don't, then just sort of being like, be more self-directed, it's not going to change things. So yes, absolutely that they don't know what they don't know. Yep.
Just competing attention.
Yeah.
So having, you're competing with the internet or multiple tabs or
right.
an e-learn.
Right, absolutely. Well, and I think one of the biggest issues when COVID happened and we put everything online is you're still sitting in front of the computer and all those little notifications are still going on all around the webinar that you're supposed to be paying attention to. So that even made the competing attention problem even worse. Steph?
I think linked to that is fatigue,
yeah.
Cognitive fatigue.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a very real issue. What are some of the behaviors or the things you're trying to motivate people to do? Is it just take your courses or pay attention or engage in learning, or are there other things? No, that list was good, Julie. Oh, we got one. Yeah.
I'd say part of a culture change as well.
Yeah.
So becoming not just self-directed learners, but being able to evaluate their own practice and see where they might have gaps or where they want to learn new things.
Oh, yeah. So practice of self-evaluation. That's a really interesting one, right? Yep. You got one?
We need them to learn specialist-specific technical skills.
Specialist-specific technical skills. Yep.
Which
Okay.
are very physical.
Oh, okay. Very physical. Example or?
Well, you need to have the theory that's then backed up by the practical
okay.
application of it.
Right.
So
Yep.
that we need to teach them the theory, but also the practical to ensure that they've understood the theory.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, there's a bunch of things there.
I think helping people to really focus on what they're trying to achieve. So then, as they go, they can like track their progress to see if they're, to what extent they're getting there.
Yep. Okay. Okay, 2 more and then we'll...
For me, it's trying to push out compliance training to
Yes,
people
it
who don't want to
is.
do it.
I was like, how did we get this far? Not have compliance show up, right?
I think from a motivation perspective, it's around people not understanding how to learn, not recognising it takes effort.
Yeah.
I did your thing and I didn't learn. And then,
Oh,
did you try?
yeah. So the application piece and things like that. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, compliance is absolutely one of these, right? And one of the questions I always ask if I don't do that much compliance training anymore, but I did a lot. And I was always like, well, do you care if it works? Because sometimes they don't. Sometimes, they usually won't tell you that, but sometimes it's like, we just need this as a line for legal defensibility in case we get sued. It's not that we actually have a thing that we're trying to get people to learn or to do differently based on this compliance training. So compliance one is a tough one, because a lot of times they are learning something they just genuinely don't need, but they still have to learn it because here we are. Lawyers, that thing. So, okay. All right, so when we're looking at motivation, we've got 2 big domains that we're dealing with, and I heard both of them a little bit. Probably more the motivation to learn piece, but we also have the motivation to do. So I can do a class on how important it is for you to wear your safety glasses, but then we also need a certain amount of motivation for them to remember and adhere to wearing their safety glasses, or whatever the actual behavior is that they need to go out and do in the world. So when we're looking at these, I think I can't do a presentation without talking about the rider and the elephant. So if you've seen me talk about this before, apologies. I promise we'll get through it quickly. But how many people know this metaphor? Okay, handful. Great. Okay. So if you think about the way that your brain developed, some of the oldest functions are things down here by your spinal cord. So things like breathing and heart rate and reflexes, very automatic stuff. Then we get things like vision, hearing, gross motor control, kind of fine motor control, some of those regions. Right in the middle of your brain, you get the limbic system, which is your like emotional regulation, fight or flight. It's your amygdala, your hypothalamus, stuff like that. And then in the front, you get this nice area that is sort of one of the more recently evolved parts of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of things like executive control and reasoning and so forth. And I'm being super hand-wavy about brain anatomy, take it with a big grain of salt, but nonetheless, like conceptually, it's all there. And pretty much any model that we look at for these things has this idea that you've got 2 entities that are sort of decision makers in your brain. We've got the elephant, which is kind of about all of this parts of your brain that feels, perceives, senses from the world, has emotional capacity, controls physical regulation. All of those kinds of things is like a big elephant with a little rider sitting on top that also is trying to steer the elephant, and that is your conscious verbal thinking brain. This is a metaphor from Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychologist. If you've read things like Thinking Fast and Slow, it's kind of, it maps reasonably to Kahneman's system 1, system 2 thinking. There's a number of these sort of dual models. So your rider is very virtuous because it is the part of your brain that considers future consequences, right? So it says, I should order a salad, or I really should get this homework out of the way, or exercising now will give me more energy later. Okay. The elephant can be a little annoying sometimes. Your rider is like, ooh, French fries, right? Or, hey, look, Celebrity Chef Deathmatch is on. Or, I'm just going to lie down on the couch for just 1 minute, right? So, when there's a disconnect between these two entities, the answer is sometimes one, sometimes the other. But who do you think, who wins a little bit more often sometimes? Elephant, right. Okay, so here's an example. You're lying in bed this morning and the alarm goes off and you go, I should get up, I should get up. If I don't get up, I won't get a chance to get some coffee before I have to go over to the registration, and then there's gonna be the sessions, and I totally was gonna meet up with that person and network, and I should really, 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 really get up. And then, but also it's kind of cold and it's, whatever. So anybody had that I should get up conversation in the morning, and then what happens? Right. Yeah. So that is a perfect example of that disconnect. The rider is considering future consequences. I should really review those notes before I have to jump on that 9 a.m. Zoom call. Or, if I don't go now, the tube is going to be just jam-packed full of people and it's going to be a miserable ride to work, or whatever future consequence that you're trading off for warm and comfortable and nice to stay in bed a little longer, right? And eventually your rider's like, no. Now we have to go or we're going to get fired because we're not showing up at our job, for key things. And then the rider wins at that point. But we have both of these decision-making kinds of variables going on for us. And one of the big pieces of this is the elephant is very present-focused. So what is nice right now? And then the rider is considering what is nice in the future. So anybody have the thing where you bought the vegetables to do the nice, healthy stir-fry? And it sounded like a great idea in the morning when you made the plan that that's what I'll make for dinner tonight. And then what can happen by 5:30 that evening after you've just had just a heck of a day and everybody's exhausted, and all of a sudden that pizza ordering thing right there starts to look really good, right? So there's a study about judges in Israel doing, I think it was probation, or not probation, it was, what's it called when they get out of jail but they have parole, thank you. It's the other P word, parole. And they mapped how harsh their parole sentences were throughout the day, and they got much, much worse when they were hungry before lunch. And then after lunch, they tended to be more generous in their sentencing. So even though we are absolutely convinced of ourselves as rational actors, these other things kind of come into play and start to influence the behaviors that we have. So the rider the elephant is concerned with what's happening right now. It feels rather than thinks. It's impulsive. It's automatic, which goes to Kahneman's system. So we have a tendency to talk to the rider. Here's the logical reason why you have to do this thing. And the rider can drag the elephant along for a certain amount of time, but then at a certain point, it's going to get tired. If you can get your rider and your elephant on board, then we have a much easier time of it. Because if your rider and your elephant are both like, I want to go pull weeds in the garden, that sounds relaxing and fun, then you're going to go pull weeds in the garden, right? But if your rider is like, we really need to deal with those weeds in the garden, and the elephant is like, but there's a nice new show that just dropped on Netflix that I'm pretty sure is more fun, then the challenge is kind of dragging it along. So here's a few different examples of things that I've seen in training programs. Maybe some of these will sound familiar. Salespeople need to switch from product-based selling to a consultative sales approach. So instead of selling, my product is awesome, the consultant's supposed to say, talk to the client, say, tell me what your challenges are. And then they're supposed to explain why the product is going to magically solve all their problems. But nonetheless, they're supposed to lead with, let me understand what you need before they get into, here's why the product is good. Or managers need to use the new performance evaluation system, which has several new categories, right? We've all had, if you've worked for a large organization, you've all had some overhaul of the performance evaluation system. I'd be willing to take a reasonable bet on that everybody at large organizations bumped into that at least once. Project managers have access to a new risk analysis tool that they can use during the project planning process. Okay, so it says discuss with folks around you, but I'll actually just do this with the room right now. What is the benefit if this goes well? Like, what's the good thing that would happen if this goes well? Sorry? You'd sell more. You'd sell more, right? Better outcomes, absolutely. Anything else that would also happen if this goes well?
Customer satisfaction.
Yeah, customer satisfaction, a better relationship with your customer. Yeah. Anybody else? More?
That you actually understand your customers and what they might need now and in the future.
Yeah, so you understand them better. You can have better conversations with them. You can think more proactively about what else you could potentially do with those customers. Absolutely, lots of stuff. How about this one? Managers need to use the new performance evaluation system, which has several new evaluation categories. If that goes the way that everybody intends it to go, what's the positive outcome that would happen?
The change management system is in place, and so staff are engaged.
Staff are engaged. Okay, so staff engagement could be one of them, absolutely. What else might happen that's good if this works the way it's supposed to? Yep.
Better growth for your employees in areas they may not have expected?
Yeah, absolutely. Your employees develop better. Maybe you have a better relationship with your employees. You maybe have better outcomes because your employees are more productive or can do more or things like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll just do this last one real quick. Project managers have access to a new risk analysis tool. What happens if that goes well? If that does what it's supposed to do, what's the positive outcome? Cost savings, sure.
Identify risks quicker and more effectively.
Identifying risks quicker, more effectively, yep. Your project stays on budget, your project stays on schedule, you actually accomplish the thing that the project's supposed to do. Lots of things, right? All right, so the way that these are described right here, who are we talking to, rider or elephant? Probably the rider, right? Like this language, I think, is going to be more compelling to the rider than it is going to be to the elephant. So when we look at this, one of the things is we have to figure out what the elephant, or really and what people in general care about. So since we're talking about motivation, I wanted to spend some time on self-determination theory. How many people are familiar with this model? Okay, decent number, good. You're better than the American audience that I gave this talk to like 2 weeks ago, so well done. Does that go to feelings of confidence, maybe? Something. If you've read Daniel Pink's book, Drive, that's based on self-determination theory. It's kind of become one of the dominant models around this. And it says that the things that are really motivational to people are competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And then they have, and so we really want to always ask ourselves in relation to that, is there a new skill or ability? Is there a better outcome? Is there a feeling of confidence or mastery? Is there a sense of relatedness? I'll get into some examples on this. So when we look at this, the continuum that Desi and Ryan use is they've got people who are amotivated, which maybe those people who have absolutely no motivation at all, maybe the answer is they should be transitioned out or into a different role. But we have people, who are in certain circumstances. By the way, this is not a characteristic of people. This is a characteristic of people in a specific context, just to be clear. Like, it's not like somebody is externally motivated all the time, But it's the reason they're doing the behavior is because of extrinsic rewards, threats, you lose your job if you don't do it, punishment, some kind of thing like that. Now, I'm going to basically explain why I don't like this one, but it's not that it's never a useful tool. So if you stopped getting paid, you would probably stop going to work. And that is very much an external reward, this salary. It's a payment kind of thing. However, it's necessary to live. And so there are places for all of these types. Then the next one is introjected, which is playing on guilt, shame, or ego. So either flattery or, here's a reason why you should be a little bit ashamed of yourself, right? Those tend to be the more extrinsic things. They don't really go to the person, they're kind of outside of them. And then there's the idea of identify, doesn't enjoy, but agrees with intent or values. So I don't like this particular activity necessarily, but I understand and I'm on board with why we need to do it. Is something that's meaningful or gives me an actual sense of purpose, is integrated, and then intrinsic is enjoyable for its own sake. right? So I have friends who have kids who are taking music lessons, and the motivation for the music lessons kind of runs the gamut, right? Some of my friends have the kid who loves it, would play all day, They don't have to lean on them to practice. They're at the intrinsic end. Then there's the ones where they like it enough of the time, but they don't always want to practice. They just kind of want to do their thing. But they might be in this, right? Like, oh, I know I should practice, right? And then there's the ones where we're trading off, Pokemon time for, like practice time. Here's a certain amount of time on the smartphone in exchange for, doing your scales or something like that. So we have all of these, and the issue with a lot of this, what are the issues down here? What do people know about the issues of being at that end of the spectrum? Any thoughts on that one? Yeah, it's absolutely a short-term solution. So as I said, if they stopped paying you, you would probably stop going to work. Maybe not the first week, maybe you'd hang in there a little bit, but as soon as it became absolutely clear that there were going to be no more paychecks coming, you would stop doing the behavior. And this is where, we look at things like intermittent reinforcement and kind of all of those sorts of things. If there's a reward and my behavior is conditional on that reward, when the reward stops, the behavior will probably also stop. Maybe not immediately, but pretty quickly. If my behavior is contingent on this reward too, sometimes you get into a situation where you have to gradually increase the reward over time in order to kind of keep people engaged. Like a little bit worked initially, and then you kind of move up the scale and things like that. So I worked for a consulting company a number of years ago, and the consulting company, we were all fairly high level. We were doing, a lot of client project work, and they had trouble getting all of the employees in the company to do their timesheets. They had to do them Tuesday morning, and lots of people didn't. One of those people sometimes. So if I want to encourage people to do their timesheets on Tuesday morning, I can use a threat, and they did, which they had if we had a really good quarter, we'd get a bonus, but the bonus usually didn't get calculated for 3 months. You got it another quarter later. And they said, if you don't get your timesheets in on time, we're going to dock your bonus $25. How well do you think that worked? Not great, right? There were two big problems with it. One is, if I have a client screaming at me and I need to deal with them, $25 doesn't sound like such a bad deal, right? In order to be able to focus my time and attention. And second of all, it was so delayed that it was kind of irrelevant, and it was also intangible because we might not even get a bonus, and then there would be no whatever. So so many problems with this. Now, if they had come along and said, Melinda, the person who has to reconcile the timesheets and do the billing, this is how you are making her life difficult every single week. You know her, she's just over there. You see her in the break room. Here is how you are making her life difficult every single week. And this is the problems that it causes, and this is the extra work that you're making for her, right? Which one do you think would be more effective in that kind of situation? Yeah, probably moving to the right. So the question that we want to ask here is, can we move it to the right a little bit? We're never going to get timesheets all the way down to enjoyable for its own sake. That would probably be the gamified timesheet that I never want to see. But we can move it down. And, yep.
Can I ask if you've got into the shame, guilt, ego part? Can I ask if you got into the guilt, shame, ego part?
Right.
What about the fact that that only works if the person actually cares about the person's life that they're making difficult?
Yes.
If they've got no ethical qualm with it.
Then that will not work. Yes, absolutely. One of the things about shame that is super important and that a large swath of people on the internet don't understand is that shame only works if it comes from a trusted source, right? If I mistrust the person who's trying to shame me, I have all sorts of avoidance defenses that will keep me from paying attention to that. And in fact, we have an avoidant behavior with shame. Okay, Miriam, what do you got?
Well, I'm just thinking, is it about shame? Because to me, it more sounds that it's about empathy, like,
Yeah.
understanding what the consequence of your behavior is. So I don't necessarily even know. Maybe
Right.
initially it's like a spark of shame, but then it's like, oh yeah, I don't, it's, yeah.
And when I'm leaning heavily on that relatedness, like Melinda is a good person and I like her and I don't want to make her life difficult, I am actually getting more into some of the things that I value too, right? Which goes to the empathy piece. So it's not just here, but it's kind of blurry across a couple probably. But yes, I agree. And guilt is not a bad thing. We talk about shame as a bad thing. Even a little shame is okay, but you will not accept shame from a trusted source. People have an aversive relationship with shame. I don't have it in here, but I saw an interesting study a couple of years ago. I could find it if anybody wants it, where they did 2 test quiz conditions. And in one test quiz, you got like, yay, you got this right for the right answer. So if it's 10 questions and you got 7 of them right, you get 7 messages of, yay, you got it right. The other condition was you just found out which ones were wrong. So if they were right, nothing happened. But if they were wrong, you got the check mark or whatever it was. I'm not sure what they were using, but you basically got the wrong feedback. And then they waited a bit and came back and gave people the test again. The people who had gotten basically the acknowledgement for right answers did better the second time around. The people who had only gotten acknowledgement when they got something wrong did not necessarily do better on the quiz. And the theory behind that one is that basically like you're wrong creates a certain amount of avoidance behavior. So you're not like digging into going, well, why was I wrong, right? As opposed to why didn't I get it right? And even just that framing can make a difference.
Yeah, I've got a question as well around agreeableness and conscientiousness. So if you're high on both of those,
yeah.
What impact might that have as well?
Hiring for agreeableness and conscientiousness, I think that that's absolutely part of it, right? I feel very fortunate to have worked in learning and development because you're all a big bunch of helpers and you're nice people to be around, right? So we hired for people who have an affinity for helping other people, which means we're a lot more pleasant than say, computer programmers, where you hire for other characteristics. And I'm not saying there aren't computer programmers that help people, there absolutely are, but I'm saying that's not necessarily a characteristic that gets hired for when you're hiring computer programmers. So it should be, and it probably in the smart places it is, but. So when we're looking at this, the question is, can we move this to the right? And this is this kind of thing. So for example, a number of years ago, I started doing these presentations and I was reading research papers. And I was like, my statistics is a little rusty. I should really, and so I went and did one of those stats MOOCs and tried to make sure that I understood the stats enough that when I'm reading these research papers and coming and talking about it, I wasn't completely, making things up. And so that would be a case of the statistics study itself was not necessarily, although I kind of like learning anything, but nonetheless, I was doing that not because I was intrinsically interested in stats, but because it supported some other values that I had. And like I said, enjoyable for its own sake is probably not a realistic goal for a lot of the stuff that we do, but can I tie it into meaningful sense of purpose? Can I tie it to competence? Can I tie it to relatedness? Can I tie it to autonomy? So I want to look at some examples. How's everybody's hand washing doing? Has it fallen off a little since the early pandemic, right? We know it's still a good behavior, and it actually turned out probably the hand washing was not the big critical factor for COVID, but we all everybody pick out your little song that you would sing to wash your hands for 20 seconds. Everybody have one of those? So hand washing is a fascinating one, especially in healthcare context, right? Because this has been a persistent problem. And I haven't pulled the statistics in the US in a while, but for a long time, our hand washing compliance for healthcare was only running about 40% in terms of what the actual requirements were. And then they added in things like alcohol-based hand rubs, and the compliance bumped up to closer to 70%. My date stats are a little bit out of date. I haven't pulled new numbers lately, but nonetheless, we still have a gap, right? We know that this is still a thing. But when we look at the hand washing question, it's a pretty easy behavior, right? You wash your hands for 20 seconds. But if nurses wash their hands as much as they're supposed to throughout the day, one study found that they would spend almost an eighth of their day washing their hands. It's a lot, actually. And so when we look at this, this is a problem that people have been looking at altogether. So I want to kind of run hand-washing messaging through our little spectrum of motivation. So I think this is what amotivated looks like, which is the regulations page. So we don't care if you're motivated. We're not even going to pretend. But if we look at messaging, like the external version of this might be the threat, the reward, the punishment, right? Employees must wash hands before returning to work. They don't actually say what the consequence is on here, but the consequence, the implication is this is not optional. You are forced to do this. If you do not do this, this is a problem, right? If we look at the rewards version, I didn't find very many of these, but this one kind of, and by the way, it's not a criticism of these people. I would try anything too. But cafeteria, raffles, gifts, a cute luau cruise ship theme. So well done. They're trying stuff. They're seeing what works. But that would be kind of a rewards-based thing. How can we make this fun? How can we attach some rewards to it? Things like that. When we look at introjected, which is guilt, shame, ego, there's some messaging. Sorry, this is a little blurry, but where have your hands been today? What you touch stays with you, like this implication that what have you touched today? Come on, right? There's identified, it was actually a little tough to find a good example, but it agrees with intent or values. So this is one where they're tying it to a greater goal. So a healthy future is in your hands. This one's geared at kids. Here's all the things you can do if you stay healthy. So clean hands keep you healthy. So we're not trying to sell the behavior for its own sake. We're trying to sell it in terms of bigger picture goals that you have or bigger picture values that you have. Integrated, meaningful sense of purpose. So this one, lead by example, wash your hands and teach kids to scrub hands for at least 20 seconds. So they're hitting some pretty important values, right, about parenting and about being, an example for your child and, some of those kinds of ideas. So that's the lever they're pulling on in this case. And then meaningful or sense of purpose, another integrated example, my clean hands count for my patients. Your patients count on you to clean your hands. Many deadly germs are spread and so on. Consider your actions put you or your patients at risk of infection. So there's a lot to be said for kind of tying it into what's my greater value as a healthcare worker. And how does this behavior support it? How is it not just an annoying thing that I have to get done, but how does this tie into who I identify with as a healthcare worker? And so that's what we're really talking about when we're talking about integrated. And I do feel like specifically integrated is something that we don't necessarily leverage as well as we should. I tried to come up with intrinsic. There are no examples, so I made one. Hand washing, a 20-second spa break in your day. Yeah, right? I'm like, maybe I should try that, like have a little hand washing kind of meditation or mantra that you do. It's your break. So I think we're going to have a tough time selling hand washing as enjoyable for its own sake, but I might give it a try nonetheless with some of the stuff that we're working on. But that would be what these look like. And I'm not sort of saying these are all equally effective, but I just wanted to kind of show you examples. If we start to look at our three circles here, if we look at relatedness, here's an example of relatedness, right? I know who these nurses are. They're doing the funny got soap thing, which I don't think putting soap on your upper lip is a good idea. But nonetheless, they're trying to, it's Got Milk is a US campaign from the Dairy Council. I don't know if you ever had it over here, but clearly like these are nurses that maybe I know or nurses that look like me. And they're doing this as a group. And so there's this sense of social relatedness to this, right? I want to be like I want to be a good, responsible nurse like these other good, responsible nurses. Because we do this. The elephant is always asking, hey, what are those other elephants doing over there? Are they doing something good? Should I be doing that? We 100% look around us for examples of how to behave and what actions to take. And that is a really strong and compelling thing that, again, I think we don't use nearly often enough. Can I show good examples of people using the behavior who are not like the stock art representation, but somebody who actually looks like a person who works there or looks like me or I feel some affinity with? Now, you want to be careful who you use as role models, because not everybody will work for every audience. That's all I'm saying, right? But if they are compelling. Now, I'm a big fan. I mean, obviously, there's a long history in advertising of using celebrities or famous people as role models, and I think there's a place for that. But I worked on a drugs and alcohol prevention curriculum for middle school. I was actually working on the teacher training piece. And if you're a 14-year-old and you're looking at role models, it turns out that far and away the most influential audience, because they tested many different messaging from different groups, was a 15, 16-year-old. So somebody who looks like me but is a little bit aspirational. That turned out to be a really big sweet spot. Now that's teenagers, but nonetheless, I think there's a principle there that's worth kind of looking at. Who is somebody who looks like me, who feels like me, but is just that bit aspirational, just that bit ahead of me? Because we do the thing. How many people have seen the thing where the senior vice president does the little go get 'em speech at the beginning of some kind of training initiative? You know what I'm talking about, right? That video? Yep. If I modeled my behavior on the senior vice president as normal worker bee in the organization, what would happen? I'd get escorted out sometime later that day, probably, right? So it's not a bad thing to show stakeholder support, but it's not the same thing as providing a role model in that same way. Okay, so this is not a shameless book promo, just ignore the cover. But if you're, I didn't want to beat up on anybody else's book, so I put mine up, but nonetheless. If you're on this page, there's a number of different sources of information about a book. There's the title, there's the back cover copy, there's messages from the publisher, there's quotes from well-known people, and then there's audience reviews. Of all of those sources, which are you most likely to trust? Audience reviews, right? Yeah, and we don't use that in stuff. We do all of those other things, messages from these people and stuff like that. We don't have that feedback from the audience about, hey, I tried out this new thing and it worked really well for me and here's what I did. And the problem with audience reviews is in order to be trustworthy, they have to be honest, so you might also get the negative ones and then you have to have a conversation about how to handle that. We can amplify the positive. Amazon does it all the time. So there's ways around it, but nonetheless, that is, in a lot of cases, the most trusted source of information, and we're not leveraging it very much. Even just kind of success stories from people who look like, if that's something that can kind of come out of a training, so 6 weeks later, you contact the people who are in this training, who's using it, can I get a quick blurb from you about what you're doing with it, and then I send it out to other people. It acts as a refresher. It acts as an acknowledgement of somebody who's actually doing it, and it acts as a form of social modeling, and it's not that hard or that expensive to do. So looking at kind of how do we get those things out there in the world. Social norming is well documented as having strong effects. So 71% of people said they practice good hand hygiene. Of course, if you're a nerd about this stuff, you're like, they said that, huh? Okay. But nonetheless, it's got the social modeling. One of the things you want to be careful of modeling is if you model the wrong way, you can actually tip the behavior. So if you're trying, they've done a lot of research with college students and binge drinking. And if they come around and they say binge drinking is a terrible problem, you shouldn't do it, they can actually cause binge drinking to go up because the belief is it's prevalent. So you need to come in with the message of actually most college students drink very moderately during the week and whatever, and then you get the norming down of the behavior. If we look at competence, I had a really hard time finding one of these, and then this was in the airport on the way here, so that was really handy. It's not a great example, but it is an example of the competence thing. Wash your hands for 20 seconds with water and soap, travel confidently, right? So the implication is I can feel safer if I've been washing my hands, but also I can feel like I'm kind of good at this travel thing. So it's not a strong pinging of the competence thing, but there's a little bit of it there, right? How do I feel confident? How do I feel competent in what I'm doing? And the values piece is an enormous one. So I was working on this hand washing topic I was doing an infection prevention control curriculum in Ghana in the post-Ebola period, because strangely there was funding for infection prevention control after Ebola. But one of the experts that I was talking to at one point told me, she's like, sometimes I think, because she's like, I think I'm a good nurse. I can wash my hands for 20 seconds. Which blew me away because I'm like, that was the clearest invoking of identity and values that I'd ever heard to motivate a behavior. was like, that is super interesting, and it's finding its way into presentations. But this idea of like, what are my values, and how does this behavior support those values? So aligning values with behavior and identity, somebody came up after a session or workshop and said, how do you get people to change their values about the environment? And the answer most of the time is you kind of don't. You show them how the behaviors align with the values. Okay, anybody here ever been to Texas? Couple, like, okay, 3-4 people, right? If you've been to Texas, you may have seen this message, don't mess with Texas. It does not mean what it originally started out to mean, but it was originally a Texas anti-littering campaign in the 80s. And the demographic most likely to litter was 18 to 35-year-old males, and they asked the question of what environmental anti-littering message would resonate with this audience. All right, so Mother Earth, protecting, green, sustainability, all of these kinds of things maybe do not speak to this particular audience in this particular way. And so they created Don't Mess with Texas, where they had country music stars, they had football players, they had actors, they had all of these kinds of people coming out and saying, don't mess with Texas, right? Which is very much, I'm not trying to change your values. Your values are protecting a sense of identity as a Texan, protecting the state, all of those, protecting Texas as a thing, all of that kind of stuff. I'm showing you how this behavior aligns with those values. What do you think? Effective? The campaign is currently credited with reducing litter on Texas highways roughly 72% between 1986 and 1990. Now, this message has now been co-opted and no longer, I think, has much tie for a lot of people to littering, but, and that's a whole other story. But nonetheless, this is a case where how do I frame this in terms of values you already have and show you how the behavior supports it rather than how do I persuade you that this value is important? And how do you know what values your audience already has? Yes, thank you. It's like I told you at the beginning, we talked about this at the beginning. But yeah, actually talking to people about what do they value, what do they think is important, what do they have about that. If you're guessing, you're probably not getting it. You might be able to get in the neighborhood, but you're probably getting some subtle details wrong that are really important. And then the last big one is autonomy. Anybody read Atul Gawande? He's also got like the Checklist Manifesto. He's the medical writer for New Yorker magazine. So I don't know if he's better known in the US, but I highly recommend. He's got a lot of really interesting stuff about improvement in healthcare. Better is quite good. It's all about how do they make certain areas better in different kinds of healthcare stuff. The Checklist Manifesto is always also very good about the idea of having kind of checklists and performance support for things. But he was, one of the case studies in Better is about the hand washing problem. And it was a hospital where they had tried all the things. They had tried enforcement, they had hand washing monitors, they had incentive programs, they had all sorts of things. And the thing that finally worked for them is they did focus groups with the staff. And when I say focus groups with the staff, I do not mean some of the staff. I mean they did focus group after focus group after focus group until literally every employee in the hospital had participated in the conversation of how do we improve hand washing, right? And they were not coming up with new ideas. After the second or third focus group, they already had a list, they already knew all the things. The point was not to continue to generate new ideas. The point was that everybody put their chips on the table, as it were, in terms of I'm committing in front of a group of my peers that I am working on this problem and I am part of the team that's trying to fix it, rather than it being something that's happening to them. So when we look at autonomy, the question is it something I'm doing or is it something that's being done to me? And what happens when we have a lot of being done to me? What do we see in terms of reactions from audiences for that? The lovely world of reactants. Yeah, we've had a few of those lately. We're all kind of coming out of the biggest behavior change experiment in human history through COVID stuff. And I don't know about here, but in the US, there were a lot of behaviors where it was like primarily the reason for not doing it for a lot of people, and they would tell you this, is that I don't like being told what to do, you know? And that's very much human nature. So when we look at this question, how many people have had the conversation at the start of a project about the old timers who are going to really, really, really resist change? Do you know what I'm talking about? Anybody have this one? Yeah, seeing some nods, right? So the problem with that a lot of the time is that these are people who, they are very much creatures of habit. They've kind of formulated their thing, but they also have a lot of knowledge. And so when you come along and you explain it to them like they're 12 in terms of this is what you have to do going forward, they don't particularly feel respected in that conversation. So it's like you've wiped away all of their experience and knowledge and said, it's not important, we need you to do this new thing. And people resist that because, again, we're going to some of those things about identity and values. We're telling you that your identity is somebody who knows everything about how this organization works and how this job function works. Doesn't matter, do it differently. And so one of the best strategies that I have seen personally on some stuff and also kind of suggested to other people about it is, can you involve that person in the conversation of how do we change this behavior? Because if you're forcing it on them, they're going to resist like you wouldn't believe in a lot of cases. But if they're now part of the team that's trying to figure out how do we change it for everybody else, then they feel that their expertise is being respected. And we all have this sort of self-confirmation bias. If I've said out loud that this is a good way to propagate this behavior, now I'm going to feel a certain obligation to carry through with it. And we like stuff we made ourselves better. It's Norton and Ariely and a few other people, Dan Ariely, about people valuing, I don't remember if it was IKEA stuff or it was something else, but they made an object and then they saw the object, so their value of the object, even though the object was made from a kit and was literally identical, if they made it, of course it must be worth more. So if we're the person contributing the idea, of course it must be worth more, right? And that frequently turns into a source of resistance in your audience, but it doesn't have to be. It can be something that you can actually leverage and use. So, and it can be little things. I was talking to somebody who teaches software, and he was talking about when he gets to the module on documenting code. And so these are people who put in comments into the code, and people frequently skip it because they don't need it, and then they come back 6 months later, or somebody else comes back, and they have no idea what the code does. And he said he used to have a slide in his presentation at the beginning of that section where he said, let me tell you why it's important to document code. And all he did was change the slide to tell me why you think it's important to document code. And I don't have any data out of what they actually did back on the job, but he would tell me absolutely the whole module would go completely differently. If I just asked my audience to tell me why it was important, I had a completely different experience teaching this particular topic. And that's free. In fact, it's easier than making the actual slide, right? So if these are our levers that we're pulling on, rewards, punishments, ego, shame, guilt, shared goals, identity, values, mastery, autonomy, relatedness, social proof modeling, we want to ask the question of kind of how could you leverage these? So, how are you? Everybody had enough coffee? They're okay for like the discussion part? Yeah, you can talk to each other? You're all sitting close to each other. You can all handle this. Find a couple people around you to discuss with this. Oh, no, sorry. I forgot there's this other part first. We'll do this quickly. What I actually want you to do is just tell me what's being leveraged here. Your hands can be dangerous. Disinfect your hands before touching mine. It only takes a minute for proper hand washing. Which levers are they pulling on for this one? Guilt, a little bit of guilt, right? Also the relatedness, like it impacts me, right? Okay, how about this one? Spreading germs is out, hand washing is in. Hand washing is one of the most important things we can do to avoid getting sick and spreading germs to others. Which levers are we tugging on here? Values, right? Mm-hmm. Relatedness, yep. I think there's a little bit of like, also you don't want to look like one of these people. How about this one? Love equals wash. And they've got some crazy acronym that I'm less concerned about. But it's, and then we've got a hand hygiene fair with free gifts. So they're doing a couple things in this one. This is, I think, for a children's hospital. Yeah, I mean, we've got some rewards there, but we're also tying it, like if, the love that you feel for patients and the care that you feel for them is tied into hand washing, So they're pulling into that relatedness and also to that values one. How about hand washing is your superpower? Fight off germs, you can defeat disease. What's that one tugging on? It's another kids one. Yeah, identity and mastery probably are the big ones there, right? Okay, so now we've got discussion. So what I want you to do is with like 2 or 3 other people around you, pick one of these, or if you have your own, feel free to use it. But decide how would you message about these using at least one or probably a couple. I'm not saying you should ever try to use all of them because that would be muddled, but discuss how could you present this out. So advocate for this particular behavior. It could be that you're selling the training. It could be that you're selling the actual behavior to people. Leveraging this. How would you talk about it to your audience if you were using some of the things from our left-hand list to kind of promote this in your organization? Clear? Okay. Maybe about 10 minutes on this one. Think about how you would do it. And let's do 7 minutes, actually. Sorry. It's just so they've got some time at the end for questions. Well done. Thanks, everybody. All right, fantastic. All right. Anybody come up with something? Oh.
Because we were just thinking out loud here and talking about the messaging, which is what this is about, right?
Yeah.
But, we have a lot of examples where, okay, we can change the messaging, but if the actions that follow then are not connected to the messaging.
If you're genuinely trying to convince somebody to do something that they have absolutely no intrinsic interest in, then you probably are leaning on some kind of external, either compliance or rewards or something like that. But the question is there anything that you can leverage? Is there any way this is in accordance with values or identities or goals that they already have? And if the answer is no, then yeah, you pretty much just you can either force them or pay them, and those are your 2 choices. So, anybody come up with anything interesting? Anybody come up with come on, demonstrate your mastery. You can do it. No? Okay.
We were discussing an example where we have a lot of new ways of working. We're in a pharmaceutical, and there's a lot of new ways of working, especially with COVID, where things like marketing need to become way more digital, and people have to really change the way they think. And so we were kind of discussing, what have we done so far, and we kind of agreed that the shared goals probably needs to be super clear. Why do we need to change this way of working? What are the consequences if we don't change our ways of working? Yep. But then also a little bit about values, and maybe even identity. When it comes to it's also your individual future as a marketeer in this context. But then when we got to mastery, that's where we started to struggle because the whole where we are, it's still so unclear to people what good looks like that. Yeah.
And to be very clear, I never want to suggest that you should have all of these present. They're options, they're tools in the toolbox you're going to have to pick. Because something like that, I agree, there's probably, I think a mastery message a lot of times looks like, hey, you can do an amazing thing at this. Anybody know who Kathy Sarah is? Oh, it makes me sad. She's fabulous. She's got a book called Badass, Making Users Awesome. And she talks very much about the kind of, nobody cares if your camera is amazing. They care if they can take amazing pictures with your camera, right? And so everything that you do should be about how do you make this person amazing? How do you make this person the hero of their scenario? How do you make this person, do something great? And so that would go to the mastery piece around new ways of working in marketing. How does this make you this amazing marketer ready for this new digital age? And you can do really great things with it. So that's a lot of what we're doing with mastery. Not this change is good, you will be good, or you will be amazing, or you will do great things with this change. And, you know, sometimes it's true and sometimes it's a little bit of a fudge, but, you know, where can we find some paths into it? I'm not saying lie outright, please don't quote me as being lie to users about what they'll get out of it. But is there any way that we can kind of leverage some of those sorts of things? All right, any questions? We've got, I think, like a few minutes left, right? Any questions?
I was just wondering, when it comes to the threat, isn't that relative to the position that someone is in as well and how big a threat it is? So
yeah.
A surgeon is definitely going to wash his or her hands opposed to someone who may not because of the outcome.
Right, absolutely. And the degree to which you have to remove error from the system, it's unlikely that you can get a system that is, no system is 100% error-free, but obviously something like surgery or flight, you know, airline pilots or whatever, we're trying to reduce error as much as possible in those systems. You are probably going to be using some kind of, you know, punishment, threat, coercion, you know, like, there's going to be guidelines, there's going to be rules. If you break these rules, you no longer get to fly planes or operate on people or, you know, things like that, or stuff like that. If it's a case where error is less critical, you know, like people aren't dying if this marketing thing is not perfect, right? That's a situation where leaning heavily on like threats and punishment is more questionable, right? Because, you know, nobody died, so using this as a punishment as opposed to leaning on some other stuff. But even so, with like surgeons and things like that, you're absolutely still looking at mastery, you're looking at identity, you're looking at values, but there may also be a, you know, the big stick of if you screw this up or if you skip this step, you know, people could die, so we have to have some additional kind of enforcement of it. All of these are useful tools, but one of the things is if you're only leaning on external, people will figure out how to comply with the external in a way that works the best for them, but it may not be something you're happy with. One of the professional organizations in the US for accountants requires 40 hours of continuing education every year to maintain their license. And I was working with them on some stuff, and one of the people there told me a story about a guy who would sign up for an 8-hour course, like a one-day course, go sit in the back, open up 2 laptops, and go through 2 8-hour e-learnings at the same time they were sitting in the 8-hour course, right? Now, if the goal is just the external compliance with the 40-hour a year requirement, he is totally winning, right? Because they're leaning too heavily on this external, you have to have 40 hours, and not enough on you should want to be a better accountant, you should want to grow your skills, you should want to develop over time. And so that's where we get when we focus too heavily on external and not any of the other values, is people find the easiest way to comply, but it often doesn't accomplish our bigger picture goal of what we're trying to do. Anybody else? Questions? Thank you for not fleeing from the discussion activity. I appreciate it. Oh, wait, one more.
What about habits? So if you can implement strong habits in people at the beginning when they stop thinking about it and it's just automatic, is there a way of doing that?
The big benefit of habits is that they become automatic, right? And so the benefit there is that it's a very low level of effort to continue a habit that's already established. So if you can figure out a way to make something a habit, you don't have to motivate it nearly as much because it's so easy to do and it happens without them having to exert a lot of effort to make it happen. So that is always a good answer for behaviors, and I have all sorts of stuff on that, but it didn't fit in this talk, which is making the behavior as easy as possible to do always, always, always is a valuable lever to pull on. It doesn't happen to fit into the motivation talk, but it is absolutely one of the most important things you can consider. How can I make this thing that I want them to do as easy as possible? That will almost always pay off. Okay, like I said, thank you for not fleeing from the group discussion activity. A few people did, but most of you stayed, so well done. Very nice. And have a fantastic rest of your conference. Thanks, everybody. If you have follow-up questions, here's my contact information. If you're on Facebook, I have an instructional design Facebook group, which I love getting questions in there because then I'm not the only person, but lots of other smart people show up to answer them too. So highly recommend. All right. Thanks, everybody.